Chapter 6 of Camille. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Camille by Alexandre Dumas Fils. Translated by Edmund Goss. Chapter 6. I found Armand in bed. On seeing me he held out a burning hand. "You're feverish," I said to him. "It is nothing. The fatigue of a rapid journey, that is all." "You've been to see Marguerite's sister?" "Yes. Who told you?" "I knew it. Did you get what you wanted?" "Yes. But who told you of my journey, and of my reason for taking it?" "The gardener of the cemetery." "You have seen the tomb?" I scarcely dared reply, for the tone in which the words were spoken proved to me that the speaker was still possessed by the emotion which I had witnessed before, and that every time his thoughts or speech travelled back to that mournful subject, emotion would still, for a long time to come, prove stronger than his will. I contented myself with a nod of the head. "He has looked after it well?" continued Armand. Two big tears rolled down the cheeks of the sick man, and he turned away his head to hide them from me. I pretended not to see them, and tried to change the conversation. "You have been away 3 weeks," I said. Armand passed his hand across his eyes and replied, "Exactly 3 weeks." "You had a long journey." "Oh, I was not travelling all the time. I was ill for a fortnight, or I should have returned long ago. But I had scarcely got there when I took this fever, and I was obliged to keep my room." "And you started to come back before you were really well?" "If I had remained in the place for another week I should have died there." "Well, now you are back again, you must take care of yourself. Your friends will come and look after you. Myself, first of all, if you will allow me." "I shall get up in a couple of hours." "It would be very unwise." "I must." "What have you to do in such a great hurry?" "I must go to the inspector of police." "Why do you not get one of your friends to see after the matter? It is likely to make you worse than you are now." "It is my only chance of getting better. I must see her. Ever since I heard of her death, especially since I saw her grave, I have not been able to sleep. I cannot realize that this woman, so young and so beautiful when I left her, is really dead. I must convince myself of it. I must see what God has done with a being that I have loved so much, and perhaps the horror of the sight will cure me of my despair. Will you accompany me, if it won't be troubling you too much?" "What did her sister say about it?" "Nothing. She seemed greatly surprised that a stranger wanted to buy a plot of ground and give Marguerite a new grave, and she immediately signed the authorization that I asked her for." "Believe me, it would be better to wait until you are quite well." "Have no fear. I shall be quite composed. Besides, I should simply go out of my mind if I were not to carry out a resolution which I have set myself to carry out. I swear to you that I shall never be myself again until I have seen Marguerite. It is perhaps the thirst of the fever, a sleepless night's dream, a moment's delirium, but though I were to become a Trappist, like M. Durance, after having seen, I will see." "I understand," I said to Armand. "And I am at your service. Have you seen Julie Duprat?" "Yes, I saw her the day I returned, for the first time." "Did she give you the papers that Marguerite had left for you?" Armand drew a roll of papers from under his pillow, and immediately put them back. "I know all that is in these papers by heart," he said. "For 3 weeks I have read them 10 times over every day. You shall read them, too, but later on, when I am calmer, and can make you understand all the love and tenderness hidden away in this confession. For the moment I want you to do me a service." "What is it?" Your cab is below? Yes. Well, will you take my passport and ask if there are any letters for me at the poste restante? My father and sister must have written to me at Paris, and I went away in such a haste that I did not go and see before leaving. When you come back, we will go together to the inspector of police and arrange for tomorrow's ceremony. Armand handed me his passport, and I went to Rue Jean-Jacques Rousseau. There were 2 letters addressed to Duval. I took them and returned. When I re-entered the room, Armand was dressed and ready to go out. "Thanks," he said, taking the letters. "Yes," he added, after glancing at the addresses. "They are from my father and sister. They must have been quite at a loss to understand my silence." He opened the letters, guessed at rather than read them, for each was of 4 pages, and a moment after folded them up. "Come," he said, "I will answer tomorrow." We went to the police station, and Armand handed in the permission signed by Marguerite's sister. He received in return a letter to the keeper of the cemetery, and it was settled that the disinterment was to take place next day, at 10 o'clock, that I should call for him an hour before, and that we should go to the cemetery together. I confess that I was curious to be present, and I did not sleep all night. Judging from the thoughts which filled my brain, it must have been a long night for Armand. When I entered his room at 9 on the following morning, he was frightfully pale, but seemed calm. He smiled and held out his hand. His candles were burned out, and before leaving he took a very heavy letter addressed to his father, and no doubt containing an account of that night's impressions. Half an hour later we were at Montmartre. The police inspector was there already. We walked slowly in the direction of Marguerite's grave. The inspector went in front. Armand and I followed a few steps behind. From time to time I felt my companion's arm tremble convulsively, as if he shivered from head to feet. I looked at him. He understood the look, and smiled at me. We had not exchanged a word since leaving the house. Just before we reached the grave, Armand stopped to wipe his face, which was covered with great drops of sweat. I took advantage of the pause to draw in a long breath, for I, too, felt as if I had a weight on my chest. What is the origin of that mournful pleasure which we find in sights of this kind? When we reached the grave the gardener had removed all the flower pots, the iron railing had been taken away, and 2 men were turning up the soil. Armand leaned against a tree and watched. All his life seemed to pass before his eyes. Suddenly one of the 2 pickaxes struck against a stone. At the sound Armand recoiled, as at an electric shock, and seized my hand with such force as to give me pain. One of the grave diggers took a shovel and began emptying out the earth. Then, when only the stones covering the coffin were left, he threw them out one by one. I scrutinized Armand. For every moment I was afraid lest the emotions which he was visibly repressing should prove too much for him. But he still watched, his eyes fixed and wide open, like the eyes of a madman, and a slight trembling of the cheeks and lips were the only signs of the violent nervous crisis under which he was suffering. As for me, all I can say is that I regretted having come. When the coffin was uncovered, the inspector said to the grave digger, "Open it." They obeyed, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The coffin was of oak, and they began to unscrew the lid. The humidity of the earth had rusted the screws, and it was not without some difficulty that the coffin was opened. A painful odour arose in spite of the aromatic plants with which it was covered. "Oh, my God!" murmured Armand, and turned paler than before. Even the grave digger drew back. A great white shroud covered the corpse, closely outlining some of its contours. The shroud was almost completely eaten away at one end, and left one of the feet visible.